it's great honor to me to have you, Mrs. Yvette Manessis Corporon. Mrs. Yvette Manessis, which is a Greek name, Corporon, which is an American name.
Yes.
And you are Greek-American.
And Kérkyrà.
And from Erikousa.
And proudly Kérkyrà and from Erikousa.
Proud. You are from Corfu. We meet together here after just having finished your excellent book called Something Beautiful Happened.
Yes.
Here, I think that's the title.
It is.
But I know everything about the book. Now I have some points here to ask you if you can explain to me how all these hate actions happen in our world. And who are born in America, of course. And your family is from Erikousa.
Yes.
And your book, Something Beautiful Happened, in 2017.
It was released in 2017, yes.
Yes, and the other two also awarded with the Emmy Award.
3 Emmy Awards.
3 Emmy Awards. The one is the Cypress Which Whispers.
Yes.
Very poetic. I don't know.
Thank you.
What happens, how a cypress can whisper.
It does. In my book, it does.
It
and
does.
you learn
So
the lessons from the
I
ancients.
promise you that I'll read also this, because the first one I read yesterday was excellent. And I told you before, very emotional.
Yes.
It's your story, your personal story, your personal loss of dear friends or dear relatives.
Yes.
And also a historic story, which has to do with the Jewish community living in Corfu. And from what I've read, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Humble people from Erikousa saved them as a Jewish family during the German occupation.
Yes.
So, how these personal and historic stories mingle together?
I didn't set out. I'm a journalist, and the last thing that I wanted to do was tell a personal story. I set out to tell a historic story, a story of what happened to my family historically in World War II in Greece, growing up, listening to my yaya's story, that it was no big deal. It was, there was a Jewish family, I helped them, I gave them food, I brought them in the house, the Nazis told us they would kill us, but we loved them and we knew it was the right thing, and so everybody worked together. It wasn't just my yaya. I am always very careful to say this. It was not just my yaya. My yaya was one of many. The entire island worked together to help this family. So I grew up listening to the story, and it wasn't until I became a mother myself, and I realized the great risk that my yaya took, and I thought, I was a new mother, I was holding my baby. Would I do what my yaya did? Would I have the strength to take food from my child's plate to feed another woman's child? Would I, at the risk of the threat of the Nazis that they would kill everyone, not just you and your children, your family, everybody on the island, if you were found to be helping Jews, would I have the strength that my yaya had to do this, to help, and to risk my child's life? And it wasn't until I became a mother that I realized just how important and significant my yaya's story was. And then I set out to start finding this family because, as I said, I'm a journalist. I tell other people's stories for a living, not my own story. I had no interest in telling my personal story, but I wanted to historically tell what happened on Erikousa because I realized it was historically significant. And as I was doing this, and as I was researching and communicating with the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem and researchers in Israel who were helping me, we were so close to finding the family, and we finally found them on April 10th of 2014. We found 5 people who are alive because of what happened on Erikousa.
Could you repeat the date?
It was April 10th of 2014. We
Just
found the
3
family.
days before?
Yes, and then 3 days after that, and mind you, I have 2 children. My son was 7 and my daughter was 10 at the time. And I said to them, look, because they had watched me searching and searching, and I said to them, and I was, typical Greek Mama, look what happened. Look, pay attention, listen to this. And I would say to them again, look what... Ελληνίδα μητέρα, Ελληνίδα μάνα δημοσιογράφος. I mean, come on. There's nobody more stubborn than a Greek-American journalist, female, right? Κέρκυρα. So I said to my children, look what happened. Your great-grandmother, η γιαγιά μου, she had no education, she had no money, she had nothing, but look what she did. She did something so important and so brave, so brave. And because of what your yaya helped to do, there are 5 people alive on this earth. The women survived, they went on to have families, generations went on because of what your yaya did, my yaya did, because of what happened on Erikousa. And I said, look what one person can do, what these simple people, when they work together, they saved lives, they made history, pay attention. Always stand up and do what's right. Forget what anyone tells you, forget what other people are doing around you. You do what you know is right in your heart and do the right thing. Because look at what your great-grandmother did. Because of what she did and everyone on Erikousa, these simple, poor people, the Nazis were gone. They were defeated. They won, the Nazis lost, and this family survived. So I'm telling them this. And then 3 days later, 2 members of our own family were murdered by a neo-Nazi in the United States, in Kansas. Their 14-year-old cousin to my 2 children, was murdered by a man shouting Heil Hitler in Kansas, in the most beautiful, safe community. People don't lock their doors because this man was a member of the KKK. He was a white supremacist. He was sick. He thought he was dying. And before he died, he wanted to know what it felt like to kill Jews. So I had to tell...
But your relatives weren't Jews.
They were not Jewish. My nephew was 14. His name is Reet. He was going to a singing audition at a Jewish community center. And his grandfather, Bill, was driving him there. 2 Christians on Palm Sunday going to a singing audition at a Jewish community center before leaving to meet the family for church for Palm Sunday. And they were murdered getting out of the car because this sick man, this disgusting man, thought they were Jewish. And then 3 days after I told my children, look what your great-grandmother did, the Nazis were defeated, I had to tell them that a neo-Nazi murdered their cousin. And my son, who was 7, Nico, he was in bed and I sat in bed with him. And I was stroking his hair and I'm trying, I'm a mother, we're supposed to comfort our children, we're supposed to make sense to them, we're supposed to explain things. I didn't know what to say. This made no sense. How could you explain this to a child? I didn't understand it. What am I supposed to tell my children? And he turns to me and he says, but I don't understand, Mom. You told me the Nazis were gone.
But you told me the Nazis were gone and that the people were saved. How could this happen?
Exactly.
So that's the question.
That's the question.
Deep existential question.
Yes.
How did this happen?
I have had a deep existential crisis since that moment, and part of my deep existential crisis in that moment was writing this book, because I don't have the answers, and I don't understand hate, I don't understand racism, I don't understand white supremacy, I don't understand why the Holocaust happened, how it could happen, I don't understand any of it. But I knew that I had a responsibility, if it was only to my own family and to my children, and that's what mattered to me in that moment, was my children and my family. And I knew that as a journalist, I had a responsibility to dig in and use my skills and my storytelling and research abilities to try to make some sense of it, to try to explain to my children. Because also I wanted to show my children that we can't let hate have the last word. If you notice in my book, I never mention the name of the man who killed Reet and Bill. Yeah. And I never will.
I found out which was this
yes.
man, and also I will not mention his name.
Never. And that I think leads to another point that I think that you mentioned that you appreciated in the book as to how history needs to remember things and how we need to preserve history. And who are the people that should be remembered by history and who should not be?
The evil people or the good people? So that's my first point.
Yes.
That's a phrase from your book. We should be teaching, and I'm a teacher.
I know. And I'm so honored that you took the time to read my book.
I agree completely with this phrase.
Good.
We should be teaching the next generation not the names of the perpetrators, like the one who murdered your relatives, but to emulate those who had the moral courage to make a difference.
Yes.
So you give only positive examples, and that's, I think, the deepest secret of our educational
I think
system,
so too.
a good educational system, to give the positive examples.
And I'm not saying we need to remember what happened. We need to remember the horrors that happened, because we need to remember these things and teach them, because we need to make sure it does not happen again. That's our responsibility. At the same point, who are we honoring? Whose name is in the history books? Let's teach our children what happened, what went wrong, and how we can prevent it from happening again. Let's not honor the people who did it. Let's honor instead the people who stood up in that dark time, in these terrible times, in the midst of what these awful, terrible, evil people did, and said, no, we are not going to allow this to happen.
The only strict phrase you use is what, during the trial of this disgusting man, your relative said, seeing the murderer, I pity you.
Yes.
I feel sorry for you because you never experienced a day of love in your life.
Yes.
And that's all.
Very true.
So, by giving positive examples, you're coming to the people of Erikousa who saved Jewish people. One family, I think it was a father and 4 girls.
Yes.
But one, Rosa, wasn't his daughter.
Yes.
So it's another
Yes,
example
Rosa was another relative. She
of
was
altruism, because Rosa wasn't his daughter.
Rosa was a cousin whose entire family was taken by the Nazis and murdered. She lost her entire family. Savas was a cousin. Rosa's, I believe it was her mother and Savas's wife, who had passed away before the Holocaust, were cousins. So they were a tight family. And when Savas and the girls heard what happened, they brought Rosa with them to Erikousa. And they protected her, and they said that she was the granddaughter because they didn't want to be separated. Rosa lost everything and everyone. The only thing she had left was Savas and the girls. So they stayed together. In fact, even after the war, after they survived, Rosa went to Israel with one of Savas's daughters, and they lived down the street from each other because they were always together.
So from 2014 till 2017, you made the research for finding out where Rosa and the other girls. But I think you found only the...
Rosa has 2 sons that we found in Israel.
You met?
Yes, not only have I met them, we're family.
Yeah.
So when I found, the first person I found was Michelle Mendelovitz, and Michelle is Spera's step-granddaughter. This was a granddaughter. This was a granddaughter. They were no different, blood or not, but it was a step-granddaughter. And even though this was Michelle's relative and her grandmother, Michelle also understood the importance of finding a bloodline. So after I found Michelle, and when I called her, she had no idea what I was talking about. I called her and I said, oh, I can't believe I found you. I've been looking for you. My yaya was one of the women who helped save your grandmother. And Michelle said, what are you talking about? Because my grandmother never talked about the Holocaust. So then we started piecing the puzzle together, what I knew of my yaya's history, what she knew of her, and she realized, oh yes, this is true. And I asked her, do you know someone named Rosa? And she said, yes, there was a woman named Rosa that my grandmother loved, but we didn't know what the relationship was. And I explained to her what the relationship was. And then Michelle was able to help me get in touch with Rosa's family, and that's where we found the bloodline. We found Rosa's 2 sons and 3 granddaughters in Israel, and they too had no idea. Rosa, in fact, was so traumatized and devastated and damaged. Rosa was terribly damaged by what she experienced, because not only did she lose her entire family in the Holocaust, but then survived on Erikousa. Afterwards, she and Spera boarded an illegal refugee ship from Greece to what was then mandatory Palestine, to be turned around by British soldiers because they didn't want to upset the Arabs by letting too many Jews in, sent to a refugee camp in Cyprus where they were behind barbed wire for a year and a half. 2 young girls lost everyone, everything, survived the Holocaust, and now they spend a year and a half in basically a prison camp in Cyprus. When they finally were able to get into Israel, Spera married a man she didn't love, who beat her, because only families and married couples were being allowed into Israel. So they were able, she got married to a man who beat her to give Rosa the opportunity to finally get to Israel. When they got to Israel, they were told upon arrival, don't look back, forget the past, your life begins today, just look forward. And they took those words to heart, and they never talked about the Holocaust. Rosa's two sons told us that on Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel, the entire country shuts down. They had to stay in the house, they had to pray, they had to mourn for the family that was lost, but they never knew who they were praying for because Rosa never told them. And it wasn't until I met them and they met the researchers who helped me fill in the blanks of their story that they learned their family's history.
I think that was a common attitude,
Yes.
not of all, but maybe of 90% of the survivors.
Yeah.
Most of them, anyway, didn't want to speak about
Yeah.
their experience.
Right. Many didn't believe them. First of all, many
Yes.
didn't believe them. And then when they got to Israel, you know, so many, and this is, I'm actually researching this for the book that I'm working on now, which I didn't realize also, when they got to Israel, it wasn't like they were welcomed with open arms. Many of them were sent to the refugee camps like Rosa and Spera. But when they got to Israel, Israel was a young country fighting for her survival, and they wanted strong people. And the new Israelis at the time looked at the Holocaust survivors and they said, you went like lambs to the slaughter. We need strong people here to build our country. And they didn't want them, and they were discriminated against.
Yeah. So many things a man like me today can't imagine
Yes.
that all this happened
Yeah.
during these travels from Greece, from Corfu. You know that we had a very rich Jewish community of 2,000
Yes.
people who didn't return from Auschwitz. Just about 60 or 70 people who returned from Auschwitz. And some 200, I think, were saved by heroic Corfians,
Yes.
who you decided to memorize them, and that's the positive
Yes.
example for us,
Yes.
for us all, and the younger generation, of course. So I think that the organization called Righteous Among the Nations
Yes.
help you. And
Yes.
then another organization similar to the first one, which is called the Association of Friends of Greek Jewry,
Yes.
also helped you to find the people you were looking for, and then to honor them with the award of moral courage.
Courage, yes.
Can you tell us about this Righteous Among the Nations? It's the garden
Yes,
outside
it is the garden.
Holocaust Museum.
Yes, in Jerusalem.
I remember that. And I have asked, what is this? And they told me that it is an organization who tries to find people, not Jewish, who help Jews.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I was, as I've said, I'm a journalist, and when I was 18 years old, I went to Israel and I studied in Israel. I studied journalism there. And I spent time in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem. And I remember walking through the garden and being so incredibly moved by these stories of the Garden of the Righteous, where it is righteous Gentiles, non-Jews, who risked their lives to save their Jewish friends during the Holocaust. And I thought about how incredible, how brave, but I never once thought about my Yaya's story because I didn't realize that history is everywhere.
Yes.
It's not just in the books or in the museums, it's at home. And it was at my dinner table in my Yaya's story. And it wasn't until later.
It was your Yaya, your grandmother.
Yes.
You call him.
Yes.
You called her always Yaya in Greek. Was just next to your door.
Yes.
And I'll tell the people that your Yaya had Agiospiriton,
Oh, yes.
the icon of Agiospiriton, and from the other side of the wall there was Rod Stewart.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, there was.
Yeah.
And, I lived with my Yaya. And, excuse me, you mentioned the Garden of the Righteous.
Yeah.
And I never realized that her story was so significant, but it was. And I went to the Garden of the Righteous and I asked them, and so did Rosa's family, to recognize my Yaya and the islanders of Erikousa. And unfortunately, because Rosa and Sparrow never talked, they never talked about what happened. You need first-person account. So it doesn't fit the criteria. But when we were contacted by the International Raoul Wallenberg Foundation to give the House of Life plaque to my yaya, I said, thank you so much, what an honor, but absolutely not. They wanted to put the plaque in front of my yaya's house because I told the story of how she welcomed them inside, and I refused because the story of what happened on Erikousa was not just my yaya's house, it was the entire island. And we would only say yes if they changed the rules and recognized the entire island, which they did.
They did when?
They did. They put a plaque when we had a ceremony. We brought the family over. It was in 2015.
2015.
It was June of 2015. We brought Rosa's family, Sparrow's family. There's a mosquito here. It's driving me crazy. Rosa's family and Sparrow's family over to Erikousa. We had a ceremony for them. The Raoul Wallenberg Foundation came, and the Association for Friends of Greek Jewry came, and the Association of Friends of Greek Jewry honored the entire island as well with the Award of Moral Courage.
The Righteous Among the Nations organization, what's another one?
Righteous Among Nations is at Yad Vashem.
Yes.
And
they... An Israeli organization.
Yes.
And the other one is a Greek organization.
There is the Association of Friends of Greek Jewry, which is based in New York. And then the International Raoul Wallenberg Foundation.
So I want to read here what you write, witnessing the power of gratitude as these survivors come forward to document the stories of their saviors, to publicly acknowledge them is for Gilly, one of your heroines, is for Gilly the most rewarding aspect of her work. Here is the word gratitude, which is also a positive word. You have to acknowledge. And I have another point here, coming back to the guilt. We cannot imagine the sense of guilt we have when you find yourself that you survived and all the others didn't survive.
Oh, yes.
So you feel guilt without being at all guilt.
Yes.
How this happens, you're not a psychologist, I'm not also, but I don't think that there is a psychological explanation.
I'm not a psychologist, but I've interviewed, at this point, I was so fortunate, and especially to have started my research years ago, when the survivors were still alive, because many of the survivors, actually all of the survivors basically that I interviewed for my story have since passed, and I was able to document their stories. And many of them did deal with survivor's guilt, and they blocked it out. They didn't know everyone was gone. Why did they survive? Why did they live? And for many of them, they didn't think that they were worthy of any happiness. Would they ever laugh again? Should they marry again? Should they have children? How could they go on with life? And it was
some of them, or most of them, didn't speak at all. But you have a hero called Nino.
Ah, my Nino.
Who decided to speak.
Not only, Nino is so special to me. Nino is still alive, and I'm so grateful that he's still alive. So Nino Nashon is, now I think he's probably 94 years old. And he's a survivor from Kérkyrà. He survived Auschwitz. And he went with his mother, his brother, and his sister. His brother and his sister died. His mother, when they arrived at Auschwitz, she was sent to the camp. She died that night. His brother survived. His sister survived liberation, but then she died of typhus immediately afterwards. 2 days after.
Liberation.
Nino and his brother survived. Nino, when I first met him, and he moved to Israel, he moved to Tel Aviv, said to me, nobody cares about our story. Nobody cares about the story of the Greek Jews of Corfu. And while his brother never talked, Nino told his story to anyone who would listen. I first met Nino in 2015, the first time I went to Israel. And I sat down with him and we talked, and he told me his entire story. I've since gone back to Israel several times. Once for the bar mitzvah of Spera's great-grandson at the Western Wall. I've gone back to celebrate Shabbat with Rosa's family. I've gone back for the Israeli book launch of Something Beautiful Happened, released in Israel. And for that story, for that party, for my Israeli book launch, Nino Nashon, 4 years after I met him, told his daughters, I know it's an hour ride, you have to drive me there, I need to be there for Yvette. He came to the book launch, he listened to me speak, he came to the party, and I was able to say to him, holding the Hebrew version of my book, which, by the way, the story is also now being taught in Israeli schools, because when the Israeli school system, Ministry of Education, heard about my book and our story, they realized that there was a glaring omission in their curriculum. Nobody knows the story of the Greek Jews. Nobody in Israel knew the story. And so they amended their curriculum and they started telling our story. That night, holding the Hebrew version of my book with our story being told in Israeli schools, I said, Nino, when I met you, you told me nobody cares. I told you people cared. Look, a lot of people care. And he said, yes, thank you for helping make people care.
And this is a good idea for us to include all this
Yes.
experience we described in our
Yes.
local history.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
We have such a lesson of local
Yes.
history. People don't know that here there was a community, the Jewish community of 2,000 people. And we'll go back now to the funeral. There were some fanatics, still fanatics, you didn't like, but you couldn't tell them, don't come to
Right.
The funeral
Right.
of our relatives. So I suppose that they came to the funeral, but to your surprise, there were hundreds of silent people
Yes.
respecting the funeral as it was a funeral. And you're right, this made no sense to accept or not to accept the Baptists or whoever would picket the funeral. They wanted to picket the funeral, I don't know against whom, but it was a funeral.
Yes, well, this is a very fringe, insane group who protests deaths of firefighters and police officers and children, and they wanted to protest this death. They're insane. They think that, that God is punishing us because people are gay, people are living different lifestyles, and they're not following the word of God. So these people were out of their minds, and they're crazy. But the community came together, and they basically stood arm in arm, and they made signs, and they did not want our family to see any of these people because they wanted, as Mindy said, Reet and Bill to be remembered as doers of good and symbolisms of love and goodness in the world, and they would not taint that day.
Bill and Reet were devout Christians, killed by a man who hates Jews, blacks, who was also a member of Ku Klux Klan. And now their funeral would be picketed by a group known for protesting against the LGBTQ community, Catholics, Muslims, Jews, and just about everybody else. So another point here, I read a phrase from your book. Mindy's path and purpose were becoming clearer to her. God was saying, I need you to bring these people together. I need you to bring these faiths together. I need you to meet these people and have conversations with them, Christian, Jew, Muslim, and others. We can't get rid of evil, but we can band together to fight it.
Isn't that true? Isn't that? And I would like to think that maybe we can get rid of evil one day. But Mindy knew.
Challenging to say that, these days Muslims are looking as terrorists. Most of us think like that. But Muslims are humans like us. And they're good and bad, good and
they're good and bad Greeks, they're good and bad Americans, they're good and bad everything. The book that I'm researching right now, in the 1900s, Greeks were not considered white. We were called dirty Greeks. and we were, basically the KKK came after us. So there's no one who is immune from discrimination. There is no one who is, it's also cyclical. There is no person of color, religion, color of your skin, ethnicity, religion, who has been immune to discrimination and racism through the years. And so and what Mindy had decided and what she realized is that what is discrimination, what is hatred, but it's ignorance. And so how do we get rid of ignorance? How do we combat ignorance? Education. Professor, that's what you do for a living, right? You educate people to try to open their minds and eyes. Yeah. And Mindy is not a professor, she's not an educator, but she knew enough to know that we need to open people's minds and eyes to realize that, people should not be judged on their race, their ethnicity, the color of their skin, on their character.
But I have another opinion. It's not only education. Your Yaya was a poor woman in a poor island.
Yes.
Maybe not educated, but was very, very wise.
Yes.
So it's not only education.
It's character.
It's character.
It's character. Of course it's character.
How to build a character.
Yes.
Not only through schools.
Oh, no.
Through positive.
Absolutely.
Positive examples.
Yes.
And that's a good
of course.
Example.
100%.
And then you have some reference to the tragic history of Hutu and Tutsi who killed each other.
Yes.
While for centuries lived with each other.
Yes.
And suddenly in 1994, something happened in the minds of the people, and Hutu started to kill Tutsi.
Yes.
Just because they heard through the radio station that you have to kill the snakes.
Yeah.
That was the name.
The propaganda.
The name Hutu gave to Tutsi.
Yep.
And 1 million, or less than 1 million, I think, or 800,000 were killed during 3 months.
Yes.
And now, can you imagine that Tutsi and Hutu live in the same villages again?
Yes, they had to go back to their homes.
And somewhere you write that some filmmakers help them to heal their wounds.
Yes. Yes. Yes, and I was fortunate to meet a survivor of the Rwandan genocide, Jacqueline, and she befriended Mindy. After this tragedy happened to Mindy, Mindy made it her mission to try to meet as many people as she could. She met Holocaust survivors in Kansas. She met Jacqueline, who was a survivor of the Rwandan genocide, and she wanted to learn from their experiences. How do you heal? How do you move forward? How do you educate people about what happened to you? And she started gathering all this information, and that's how Mindy started on this mission and campaign to help educate and bring people together.
Another point, he who saves a life saves the world. Too simple, too rich in meanings.
I have to tell you, when I first started, when the book was first published and I started giving speeches, I had people come up to me who were in tears and thank you. And I said, I didn't do anything. Don't thank me. It was my yaya. And they were so emotional, and they were like, no, thank you for saying this, because my family experienced the horrors of the Holocaust. And it's so important for us to hear that this happened too. We need to rephrase our thinking, and we need to remember that the Holocaust was not just devastation, but it was also people like your grandmother and this entire island that stood up to do the right thing. And they would repeat this phrase to me. And it really just, drove the point home of the power and significance of one story and how that ripple can change the mindset. Exchanging stories is maybe one way to find a solution to today's problems. We have to speak.
About such stories.
We have to speak. There are some schools in the United States that the Holocaust is not being taught.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? And these deniers that Holocaust didn't happen?
Yes.
There are some schools in the United States that are not teaching 9/11 at this point. We have to talk about these difficult things. We have to educate our children and teach them again, as not just that these bad things happened, but look at the good that happened at the same point.
Persons like
Yes.
Yaya and all these people.
Yes.
Because I think now that she put her life in risk. And also, there were people who betrayed, and we know them. In Corfu we know some families who not only betrayed, but we don't mention the names because we want to mention only the positive names.
And it happened everywhere. It wasn't just Corfu.
Yes.
It happened everywhere. But guess what?
It's not a Greek phenomenon.
It is absolutely not a Greek phenomenon. It happened everywhere. But not only that, there were people that were saved all across Kérkyra, all across Greece. I was at lunch with my editor in New York, and I don't know if you're familiar with the chef Maria Loi, how famous she is here in Greece, but in New York she's quite famous. A Greek chef, Maria Loi, and I went to lunch with my editor, and I had my book on the table, and Maria came over, and she saw my book, and she started crying. And I said, oh my goodness, what, have I done something to, she said, you wrote When the Cypress Whispers? And I said, yes, I'm Yvette, it's nice to meet you. This is my new book, this is my editor, we're just talking about it. And she started crying, and I said, I don't understand, why are you crying? She said, why am I crying? I read your book, and my father saved 5 Jews. They were his friends, and we hid them in our house, and we gave them food, and he risked everything to save them, and we never talked about it. And it wasn't until I read your book that I realized that it happened all over, and it wasn't just us. And thank you for reminding me of this and telling me and reminding me that I need to talk about this story. And I've heard that from so many people. It wasn't just Erikousa, it wasn't just Kérkyra, it was all across Greece. And look what...
And maybe all across the world.
Yes, yes.
I can imagine now some Hutu who saved Tutsi during the
Well, my friend Jacqueline was saved. Her entire family was murdered, and she was saved.
And going to
The film.
This experience, film experience during the Holocaust, Daniel's family, the Christian woman who changed the course of his family, here is the betrayal of a woman.
Daniel Sousis, yes.
Yes. You mentioned the name of the survivor, but his family couldn't survive because some woman told the German occupiers, here...
what are you looking for Jews? Oh, she's right in there.
She's right there.
And they had already passed by the house, and they went back and they got Daniel and his brother, I believe. Daniel's mother and brother.
I'll close this interview with Paul's epistle to Romans. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
Yes.
I
love
think
that saying.
Is the motto.
Agreed.
Doing the good thing and let the evil pass by.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Yvette.
Thank you, Professor, so much.
I really enjoyed the interview, and I promise that I'll be the first who will read your new book. I enjoyed reading the...
Thank you. That means so much to me.
Beautiful happened.
It did. It did.
Something beautiful happened here and
now.
Right.
And now as well. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure.
Εγώ διάβασα το βιβλίο αυτό και τι να σας πω, σε μία μέρα δεν έχω ξαναδιαβάσει βιβλίο, μπορεί να πάρει και 2 μέρες. Δηλαδή, σου λέω τώρα, ξομολογούμε, από τις 2 η ώρα το πρωί διαβάζω και τελείωσε. Είναι ένα εξαιρετικό βιβλίο. Σε κάποια στιγμή δακρύζεις, δεν υπάρχει περίπτωση να μην δακρύζεις. Όπως όταν η οργάνωση η δίκαιη των εθνών σε βοηθάνε και η άλλη παρόμοια οργάνωση ελληνοαμερικανική, η δίκαιη των εθνών είναι μια οργάνωση που βοηθάει ανθρώπους σαν την Yvette να βρούνε μη Εβραίους που βοήθησαν Εβραίους. Και έτσι η γιαγιά. Αλλά όχι μόνο η γιαγιά, όπως είπε, σε όλο το νησί. Εγώ δεν το ήξερα και ασχολούμαι με την ιστορία, δεν ήξερα αυτή την ιστορία. Όλο το νησί βοήθησε 4 και 5, μια οικογένεια. Ένας μπαμπάς, 3 κόρες και ένα υιοθετημένο παιδάκι. Και τελικά με πολλή αγωνία, και η αγωνία είναι ο τρόπος του γραψίματός σου, Yvette, βρήκε τους απογόνους της Ρόζας και της Σέρα, αν μην λέω το. Βρήκε. Και χαρά μεγάλη, αλλά αυτό, η σύλληψη του συγγραφέα, της συγγραφέως, είναι ότι παντρεύει την προσωπική της ιστορία. Όχι μόνο αυτή και μια άλλη στην Αμερική, που συνέβη περίπου το ίδιο δραματικό γεγονός στις ίδιες μέρες, και την ιστορική ιστορία της σπουδαία, τη δραματική, τη μαύρη, όταν οι κατακτητές Ναζί διώκουν τους Εβραίους. Αυτή είναι μια ιστορική ιστορία. Και η προσωπική σου ιστορία, που είναι ότι εκείνες τις μέρες ένας Ναζί, αφού είχες πει στο παιδί σου ότι δεν θα έρθει ξανά Ναζί, επειδή αγωνίστηκαν με τον τρόπο τους, οι ταπεινοί γονείς, η γιαγιά, ο παππούς ήταν στην Αμερική και δεν θα ξανάρθουν. Όμως ήρθε ένας στις 13 Απριλίου του 2014 Ναζί και σκότωσε 3. Από τους 3 οι 2 ήταν ο ανιψιός σου και ο θείος σου. Έτσι. Και εκεί αυτά τα πάντρεψε η Yvette, με έναν τρόπο τέτοιο που υπόσχομαι να διαβάσω και το καινούριο σου που βγάζεις πρώτος.
Την Yvette την έχω τιμή να κατηγόμαστε από τα διαπόντια νησιά και για όποιους δεν ξέρουν την Yvette είναι best seller, όχι ηθοποιός, γιατί ασχολείται με ηθοποιούς, είναι best seller σε βιβλία που έχει γράψει αποκλειστικά για την Κέρκυρα και για τις ιστορίες που έχουν ξεκινήσει από την Ερείκουσα εδώ και πολλά χρόνια από τη γιαγιά της. Δεν έχω γράψει κάτι, απλώς μιλάω από καρδιάς, γιατί η Yvette, πέρα που είναι δημοσιογράφος, έχει πάρει Emmy, εκπομπή της κλπ. Έχει τόσο πολύ αγάπη μέσα της προς το νησί μας, που έχει γράψει 3 υπέροχα βιβλία, που μόνο θα μπορώ να τη συγκρίνω και δεν είναι Ιεροσελία, μόνο ένας Εγγλέζος έχει γράψει βιβλία για την Κέρκυρα. Και αυτός είχε στόχο τους Εγγλέζους, η Yvette είχε στόχους τους Αμερικανούς, να πει την ιστορία της και όχι μόνο, έχει γίνει bestseller σε πολλά κράτη και είμαστε πολύ τυχεροί που τον έχουμε σαν πρέσβυρα της Κέρκυρας στο εξωτερικό. Οπότε, εγώ μιλάω μόνο από αγάπη, σαν φίλος και σαν αντιπρόεδρος γαστρονομίας, που όπως λένε και οι Αμερικανοί είναι foodie, λοιπόν, αλλά πέρα από αυτό έχει μια υπέροχη καρδιά που την απλώνει στην πένα.
My friend, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Spiro. Anyway, my story starts with my yaya, who, as you heard, is from the little tiny island of Erikousa, like so many of our yayas here, right? She was uneducated, like all of the women of Erikousa were. She was simple. Ήτανε πολύ φτωχιά, δεν πήγε σχολείο, δεν ήξερε να γράψει, δεν ήξερε να διαβάσει, but she was incredible. And I grew up listening to my yaya's story about αυτή την οικογένεια του Σάββας, του Ισραήλ. Ένα Εβραίο εδώ από την Κέρκυρα που έραβε ρούχα. He was a tailor and he sewed clothing. And my yaya would tell me stories about αυτή την εποχή, that time, στην Ερείκουσα. Ο παππούς μου είχε φύγει, my παππού left, he was in America, like so many men at the time, trying to make money. And then the war broke out and he couldn't come back, δεν μπορούσε να γυρίσει στην Ελλάδα. So my yaya was left on Erikousa with 2 small children during the Italian and then the German occupation. And she loved telling me stories about this time. One of the stories was about Savas. Savas was the tailor. He had 4 girls, 3 daughters and a young girl named Rosa. And during the German occupation, when the Nazis rounded up all the Jews of Corfu and sent them to Auschwitz, where 1,800 of 2,000 died, Savas managed to escape and made it to Erikousa, where my yaya and the rest of the islanders all worked together to hide and save him. And I remember yaya telling me this story when I was little. Ήταν ο Σάβας, τον κρύψαμε, όλοι δουλέψαμε μαζί, we all worked together, έπαιρνα φαγητό από τον πατέρα σου το πιάτο, δεν είχαμε να φάμε, but έβαζα φαγητό από το πιάτο του πατέρα σου να τους ταΐσουμε. They didn't have a lot of food, but she would take food from my father's plate every night to feed this family. Every night the girls would leave their hiding place. They were hiding in the priest's house. The priest actually left, so Savas and his girls had a place to hide. And they would leave every night, come to my yaya's house, knock on the door because they were friends. Yaya would let them inside, and they would stay up sewing and talking all night. My yaya did this, as did all the other friends in Erikousa who helped, even though the Nazis told them, we will kill you, we'll murder your children, we'll murder you all if anyone is found to be helping Jews.